So Scarbs, two big tyre failures in the one race, both around 30 laps. What was your take on that?
It's actually been quite interesting looking up the evidence that we saw on the track, hearing what Pirelli have had to say, and then listening to the breadth of comment on social media. A lot of people are very negative about Pirelli. Very few people coming up with any sound reasons why it would be anything other than a cut in the tyre that led to the failures. And I'm very much of that latter opinion. I don't think it was a failure of the tyre per se, although we've seen time and time again that cuts on these current generations of tyres does lead to a complete failure of the tyre. It's a slightly different argument. Is that right or wrong? And I got to be honest, I don't know enough about these to say otherwise. But what we saw as far as, or at least in my opinion, in Baku, was in fact, three situations where the tyres were cut in an identical place on identical corners of the tyre. So it was the left rear, which isn't the most highly loaded tyre in Baku, but we had both Stroll and Verstappen have failures on that inner shoulder. And they found similar cuts on Hamilton's rear tyre as well, exactly the same sort of setup. But with Hamilton, the cut was only in the tread surface, it hadn't gone down to the construction, and that allowed him to keep the tyre intact. So then the question rises is, well, what caused that? And I think the easy answer is to say debris, but I think that looking at the time span between the failures, I don't think we're talking about a single piece of carbon that was floating around on track, had come off from a car from a crash or running over curbs. So it's probably more likely to be something a bit more structural around the circuit, such as the inside edge of a curb where maybe some debris got lodged, or maybe it's just the sharp edge of the curb, a drain cover, as we saw a couple of races ago, even one of the F1 cameras embedded into the curbs caused tyre cuts. I don't know what that is. It's down to the Pirelli and FIA and team engineers to go and walk around the track and see where those drivers may have taken that left rear tyre where no one else has gone to cause those cuts. But I don't think we're looking at a sort of systemic failure of product quality on these tyres that caused that initial failure. As I say, you could argue whether these tyres should fail from relatively minor cuts, but these are very highly stressed race tyres.
Having said that, both tyres, as we said, had done over 30 laps, so we've got to conclude that wear obviously was a factor going that deep into the race.
It is, and clearly a factor, as we saw with Hamilton's tyre that had a cut but not down to the construction, is how much tread you've got left depends how deep that cut would be, and that would be the same with with any tyre. When your tyres get worn, they're more susceptible to being punctured. I don't think that's a key factor. I mean, Pirelli wanted people to do two stops. That was what they felt was the best solution. We so often see in the race that people are pacing themselves to get through the race on a one stop, so it's often the most strategic solution for them in terms of managing track position, despite the fact that Baku is relatively easy to overtake. But we did see some people struggling against the car, which they were probably quicker at, but still just couldn't quite get that manoeuvre completed. Hamilton versus Perez is a kind of classic example of that. But these tyres, the left rear is the least worn of them. The right rear took a lot more wear. And then obviously the opposite front tyre as well. So while wear is a factor, I don't think it is a key part of the cause here. Even if they had thick treads, they would have picked up these cuts regardless. And again, you'd need to be a tyre engineer to know whether a thicker tyre would have suffered similar situations.
But thinking laterally, should we perhaps now be giving Pirelli the option, given that this is a safety issue, of mandating the number of stops that must be made in a race?
I think there's an argument to be had there, definitely. I mean, we've seen so often, like Silverstone last year, with those failures where they really were running those tyres out to the very end of their life, and they're clearly getting very thin at the end of that. But Pirelli choose the tyres, but then it's down to the teams and how they operate them. They've got various things that they have to conform to, such as cambers and pressures, which get changed as Pirelli learn about the tyre through the weekend, indeed through the season as well. So yeah, there could be an argument about that, but equally the teams have their own personal responsibility to themselves and their drivers. If they feel that these tyres are going way beyond what Pirelli are recommending, they shouldn't do that. They shouldn't be allowed to do that. But I don't see anything that Pirelli said in the build-up that would mandate the teams should have run three sets as it were, two stops, three sets of tyres in the race. And again, I think maybe the frustration a lot of people have with Pirelli is that there is this sort of perception that these tyres are susceptible to things where perhaps previously tyres hadn't been. So maybe there needs to be a bit more of a discussion, and I'm sure there will be with the teams and the FIA and Pirelli after these incidents.
Finally, Scarbs, what did you think about the decision to have a restart from a standing start instead of just finishing the race under safety car conditions with the cars filtering through the pit lane?
I've actually thought a lot about that question overnight, and my first reaction was, oh no, what terrible end to the race. And then it's like, you have the restart, which seems somewhat unfair. And then lots of people were either angry or not angry that the red flag wasn't pulled immediately, that the race wasn't restarted. I think looking as a whole now, I think the FIA did the right thing by pulling the red flag. I think they did the right thing by restarting the race, because there was no reason with fresh tyres that people couldn't go out and continue racing, as much as it was a slightly odd situation and led to one of the most spectacular few laps of F1 racing I can remember for many years. I think the one question is, how quickly should have they pulled that red flag out after seeing a second near identical tyre failure? And I think that should have been pulled much, much quicker. I think they waited just a little bit too long for that, seeing that there was immediately a pattern emerging with this. And it has to be said, full credit to Red Bull, which had the most to gain by just keeping the race going under yellow flags, with potentially Perez following the yellow flags to a certain victory. That Jonathan Wheatley came on the radio to Michael Massey, FIA technical director, and said, look, I think we should pull a red flag and everyone should change tyres, because this came completely without warning. And that was really Red Bull kind of giving up their trump cards there and doing what was best. And I think it's quite typical of a lot of the people in the teams that have that feeling. So yeah, red flag should have been quicker, but otherwise I think the way that the race was stopped and restarted was absolutely the right thing to do, because of the conditions they were racing under.